In addition, you would have a lot of global action. One of the big disappointments the Chinese have had with the Ukraine war is that everything that they thought was true for the last 40 years has now been proven wrong. They've always known that taking Taiwan that would be harder than Russia taking Ukraine because, you know, there's not a land border, it's not flat, there's a moat. They thought that the world would do nothing. And if you take the sanctions that the world has put on Russia and put them on China, oh my God. I mean, the Russian economy isn't great, but it is a massive exporter of energy products and food products. China is the world's largest importer of both of those. So you put a similar lockdown on the Chinese system, you're talking about famine in under a year, not to mention a complete industrial collapse. So every plan, diplomatically, strategically, militarily, that the Chinese have been gaming out for a generation, they now know are completely wrong. And this would be the point where normally you would take your smart people and put them in a back room with some beer and some pizza and say, don't come out until I have a plan B. But Xi has shot all those people. So normally, I would say the chances are zero. But if we're moving into an environment where the Chinese are facing simultaneous agricultural, health, population, and energy collapses, assuming the Americans do nothing, there is something to be said for choosing the time and the place of a patriotic war in order to write the narrative. And if that allows the CCP to remain in power for the low, low price of 700 million dead Chinese, well then okay. So I give it like a 1 in 4 chance.
We have a couple of questions around India. So do you see India rising to fill China's gap?
No. Don't get me wrong, I think India's future is pretty bright. But India is never going to be able to do the multimodal, multi-step manufacturing that the Chinese are capable of doing at scale. They don't have the infrastructure, they don't have the political capital, they don't have the cultural structure. Now, I do think that India will be producing enough manufactured goods within 10 years for their own population. And if you take 1.5 billion Indians and make them a world unto themselves in manufacturing, that is globally significant, yes, but it does not make India a global player. It is a static, statist economy, and that can work for them, especially in their environment. But being kind of the nerve center for global manufacturing, no.
We have a couple of questions around climate.
Sure.
Is that crisis, how does that crisis rank relative to the items that you've discussed today?
It's a moving target, so it's really hard to say. Getting climate predictions down to like the country and the zip code level, we just don't have the data for right now. The biggest impact by far for climate shifts isn't going to be in your industry, in my opinion, it's going to be in agriculture. Because if you move the bands where you can grow certain crops, if there's no population or infrastructure where the bands move to, oops. This is a real big problem in the subcontinent, in the Russian wheat belt, and in China specifically. Those are the places where climate is most exposed to potential changes, and crops are monocultured in high concentrations in very specific climate bands where if they move, you just can't grow it there. So yeah, we're definitely looking at a big problem there. I also don't think that we're going to see the energy transition, though, that is necessary to deal with it. Let me deal with that from 2 points of view. Number one, the technology is not sufficiently mature, in my opinion, to be applied in most places. Solar and wind only work over about 5% of the Earth's surface. It would be about 15% of the global land surface. And for most countries, that is not where the people actually live. So it works in Texas. Dallas-Fort Worth is at the edge of the solar zone. It's at the heart of the wind zone. It will probably be the first major metropolis in the United States to go 100% green, not because there are environmentalists in Texas, but because Texans can do math and they like free. Omaha will probably be second, Denver will probably be third. You can't do that in Europe. You can't do that in China. And don't get me started on EVs. I mean, I'm a big fan of things with few moving parts, but that has to apply to the supply chains to make it too. And the lithium comes from one place, and it's all processed in China. So just building the alternate processing infrastructure, and oh, by the way, we'll have to invade Russia too, just to get the materials to do EVs at scale is just laughable for the next decade. We need a new technological series of breakthroughs in materials science before that is possible.
Can you elaborate on the opportunities in the Texas Triangle and the potential growth in northern Mexico?
Oh my God, that's a whole presentation too. The Texas Triangle is the part of the United States that is likely to experience the fastest economic growth for the next 30 or 35 years. You've got the population centers, you've got a port, you've got a financial center, you've got low, mid, and complex manufacturing all in one place. You plug in the Mexicans to that, they're already plugged into it. The biggest limitation we have right now is infrastructure. And you guys all seen the traffic. There's no quick fix for that, but you've been working on it for 30 years, you're gonna be working on it for another 30 years. And if you are talking about the United States needing to double its industrial plant, I figure at least a third of that is going to happen here. Biggest challenge is going to be capital. Texas has cheap land, cheap power, cheap food. That's part of the draw. Low taxes. Capital. With the baby boomers going away, we have to do all of this in an environment of constrained capital and constrained labor. And one of the things we are going to see is that Texas' success is going to hoover up labor from the rest of the country. That didn't matter 15 years ago because there was plenty of labor everywhere. Now it's constrained. And a win here now is broadly a loss everywhere else. Now, Texans are like, so? I get it. But the political splits we have seen between Texas and everyone else is nothing to what's coming, because we're talking about a Texas that is going to be experiencing economic growth rates of like a Korean scale, while the parts of the country that just can't pull this off are drained. So from my point of view, this is maybe a positive because it means we're going to be arguing about something besides the culture war. We're actually going to argue about something that in my opinion matters. But it's going to get ugly because success here is no longer necessarily a driver of success elsewhere. If you border Texas and you get sucked in, that might apply. For those of you who are from Oklahoma, you're becoming a satellite of Texas. The Texans are actually reaching out to you to interface on purpose. This is weird. But the same thing's going to happen to Louisiana. The same thing is going to happen probably to Colorado.
What contribution do you see from the African continent in terms of global manufacturing horsepower?
Oh, manufacturing? None. None, very little. Africa is a series of stacked plateaus, so just getting the infrastructure in there to access anything is very difficult. And while they do have very high birth rates and a more stable population structure, a lot of that is only possible because they export raw commodities and then import the things that allow them to have a degree of modernity. You break down global supply chains, a lot of that goes away. And so I think a lot of Africa is going to devolve. And they just don't have the infrastructure or the skilled labor that's necessary to participate at scale. And even if they did, in a less robust security environment, the connections necessary to make that happen are going to be